Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It was March of 2020 when my precious wife Lisa and I tuned in to hear the president speak to the nation regarding this new disease called COVID-19, or the coronavirus back then. And I was fascinated by what I heard about the virus, and like a lot of people, somewhat frightened by it. But what I was frightened more by than the news of the virus was the president just very comfortably and peacefully announcing to the American people that he was going to forbid travel between this nation and China, or travel into Europe from this nation, or travel from Europe into this nation. And I, frankly, was stunned. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this country has sunk so far from its original founding ideals that a president who is hailed by conservatives would feel that he has the authority or the right to tell the citizens of these United States where they could go and where they could not go. I just couldn't believe it. I had flashbacks to when Jimmy Carter came on television in the late 70s to scold us about having our thermostats turned up too high. I don't think there was a law about that, but I didn't appreciate the scolding. I want a politician, whatever party they're a part of, I want a chief executive to be acutely aware of the limitations of his authority. Well, I'm not here to today rehearse something that happened more than a year and a half ago. Instead, I'm here to talk today about what I heard late last week. You see, Lisa and I once again tuned in to listen to a president, the different president, talk about the same theme, COVID-19. This time, though, about the Delta variant. And I listened, and I listened, and I learned this, and I learned that. And, of course, I had learned quite a bit in the interim. But what really caught my attention was none of the numbers, none of the charts. What caught my attention was the president suggesting that he has the authority to require private businesses to require their employees to either receive the vaccine or be tested weekly. He went on to say that all employees of the executive branch of the federal government would be required to have the vaccine, no exceptions, and all those businesses which contract with the federal government would have the same requirement. Now, friends, I don't want to have a debate with you whatsoever about how dangerous the Delta variant is, or even how dangerous the vaccine may or may not be. That's not my purpose today. My purpose is to highlight the staggering level of blindness to the limits of one's office exhibited by this president, just like the last one. Only I would say this time worse. It's one thing for the president to say you can't go here or there. It's another thing for the president to say everybody's got to have this shot. I have the authority to require the citizens of this country to have medical people put something inside them that these people don't want inside them. Wow. That, friends, that is far more terrifying than the coronavirus. I want you to understand a little bit of why. Again, I'm not saying that corona is not dangerous. I'm not saying that many people haven't died. I'm not saying anything like that. But here's what I am saying. One day it's going to be over. And we're still going to have a political system that we have, because of COVID, allowed to be completely and absolutely, utterly untethered from its founding document, the Constitution. There are at least two levels at which this new program of President Biden's are radically and profoundly against the Constitution. One is he is doing this via what we call executive orders. And we've had controversy in the past over executive orders on both sides of the aisle. There have been presidents who said, well, I'm just going to decide this, like the president deciding that people couldn't travel here or there. That wasn't voted on by the legislature. It did not follow the constitutional procedure by which something becomes law. And the same thing is true here. In fact, the president's saying, I don't even need to think about that. I don't need to talk about that. I don't need to worry about that. Do you understand that quite literally, if every single member of the Senate and every single member of the House of Representatives opposed what the president determined, the president is claiming the authority and the right to do it anyway? I don't need their approval. I don't need their votes. And then there's, the little matter of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, the last of the Bill of Rights, which plainly and straightforwardly declares that unless a specific power is enumerated, that is listed as belonging to the federal government, if it's not listed in the Constitution as being something the federal government's supposed to do, then they have to stay away. Then it remains with the people or the states. In short, the president also needs to, have the approval of the governors and their legislatures to do anything like this. Now, you may have your hair on fire about COVID, or you may not. But again, the simple reality is, far scarier is a president who thinks he can just make these decisions on his own. But one of the reasons that we're here is because conservatives were comfortable having presidents exercising this non-existent, unconstitutional authority when those decisions were being made in conjunction with the perspective of these same conservatives. It's a sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander kind of thing. That when you jump up and down and say, it's terrible to have executive orders, and then when your guy's in office giving executive orders, you're saying, well, that'll show those pinheads in Congress. There's a problem there. And at the end of the day, the problem is a failure to trust God. When the devil cheats, when he doesn't play fair, what he's doing is he's throwing down a gauntlet and he's saying to you, do you trust God to deliver you from my stratagems in accordance with his law? Or are you so frightened by what I've just done that you're willing to break the rules too? Because here's the thing. If you do break the rules, you've already changed sides. And this is true politically. when you embrace the idea that the policy X is so important that we should forget procedure, well, it's a free-for-all. A principled person is a person who is willing to lose what should be done to protect doing things the way they should be done. Think of it another way. Think about the vigilante. What's the vigilante do? He looks at the person who gets off scot-free in his trial because of some technicality. That's what we call these procedural things, technicalities. Well, the rule says that if you don't read the guy's rights, then you can't use what he says against him in a court of law. If you do, then you can. But if you don't, you can't. So a police officer doesn't tell the accused he has the right to remain silent. The accused confesses. The accused then gets his lawyer. The lawyer says that's not admissible because you didn't read him his rights. Oh, but he admitted it. Well, yeah, I know he admitted it. But you can't admit that in the court. And so now you have no confession. And now this guy goes free. Now here's what you got to ask yourself. Are you going to go kill him? Are you going to say, the just thing is for me to take this upon myself and correct the failure of the system that was set up to make sure that people know their rights? The principled person is willing to lose in order to protect, is willing to lose the case, to see things not end up as they should, in order to protect the integrity of the process. And anyone willing to do the right thing, anyone willing to do the wrong thing for the right reason will also do the wrong thing for the wrong reason. I want you to understand that any government, any president who is gifted by our indifference with the ability to put foreign substances in the citizens of this nation has effectively become a tyrant unlike the world has ever known. Even if he thinks he's saving my life, even if he thinks he's saving my neighbor's life, it doesn't change the fact. Do not put up with this. Don't even look at this as an issue about COVID. It's not about COVID. I'd rather 80 million people die from COVID than 80 million people be forced to take a shot because the president decides that's what he thinks they should do. Friends, God is on his throne. God is in control. And our job is to trust him and to do all things decently and in order. Not to panic, but to trust. The president and all those on either side of the aisle who's not ready to fight this tooth and nail, them I don't trust. We come now in our ongoing series that we call The Bible in 5 Minutes to the book of 2 Thessalonians. Last week, as one might expect, we looked at the book of 1 Thessalonians. And just want to remind you that while there are certainly scholars of a more liberal bent who may doubt this, most scholars agree that this is a book written by the Apostle Paul. And it's written, of course, to the church at Thessalonica, written at about 50 to 52 AD, not long after Paul wrote 1 Thessalonians, and he covers some of the same themes. One could almost argue that 1st and 2nd Thessalonians are sort of like an ordinary letter of Paul's, but cut in two. And here's what I mean by that. In 1 Thessalonians, we have a lot of teaching from Paul, teaching that relates to the end of history and the return of Christ. And in 2 Thessalonians, we have more of that, but we also have some very specific points of application that come out of that. There have been people who are teaching false doctrines, among those this idea that the return of Christ had already happened. Now, you may not know this, but there are actually people out there to this day who continue to teach this heresy. The heresy is called hyperpreterism, or Hymenaeism, or Pantelism. The idea of this ideology is that all biblical prophecy has already been fulfilled, and the hyperpreterists love to find much of, or all of the fulfillment in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. Now, your humble host is what is called a partial preterist, which simply means that I believe that many of the prophecies that some people think are future, I think are past. But I have no question in my mind that there are still many wonderful things to look forward to, not the least of which is the return of Christ and the resurrection of our bodies. And this, by the way, is why this is a heresy. I don't generally want to see sort of eschatological differences being viewed as a question of heresy, except what happens with the hyperpreterist view is you end up denying what we confess as the church in the Apostles' Creed, that Jesus is coming again to judge the living and the dead. And more important still, we deny what we confess in the Creed and what the Scripture plainly teaches, which is the resurrection of the body. These folks are they hang around the internet, they self-publish their books, they have their little events. It's very, well, I won't go there. Let's just say that these folks are dangerous, and they can hide in fairly plain sight in certain places, certain churches, and not get disciplined for it. They can be very nice people. I don't want to dispute that either. But it's a very, very, very bad, dangerous heresy. Now, among the heresies at Thessalonica is, well, actually, I wouldn't say it's heresy. The mistakes that Paul's trying to correct is this idea not that Jesus has come, but also that Jesus is coming imminently, in the sense of within a matter of days, within a matter of weeks, which may have encouraged another problem that Paul addresses very clearly. Again, practical problem that flows out of this, which is there were people who were not working. They were so sure that Jesus was coming soon that the whole idea of providing and saving and investing seemed foolish to them. Well, think of this, friends. Even when God himself knew that they were only going to be there for 70 years, God encouraged God's people when they were in exile in Babylon to plant their gardens, to marry, to pray for the peace of Babylon. That this idea that we can peer into the future, know for sure how soon something's coming, and then make all sorts of economic decisions is not something that's necessarily a safe thing to do. So Paul is writing to these believers, telling them, yes, you're suffering, yes, there's hardships, and you need to persevere through these things, but don't be busy overly speculating about when Jesus will be coming. Do the right thing. Remember also, Paul says to this audience, that when Jesus comes, it will be a great victory for God's people, but great judgment for those yet outside the kingdom. So, what we're called to do is live faithfully in light of that. It's a wonderful message that remains true in our day. One thing we know, the return of Christ is a lot closer now than it was almost 2,000 years ago. So we've got much more reason to hope that he will be coming soon. But also we have the example of the church that's gone before us showing what it looks like to be faithful while we cry out, Maranatha, Lord Jesus. So 2 Thessalonians is a very helpful book for us to give us a balanced sense of eager anticipation for the return of Christ, as well as a sense of being diligent, being faithful, and not being overly speculative.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.